beautiful Monday morning in lockdown heaven. Delighted to be here with you all. Thanks for joining in and for tuning in. Thank you, Princess Shelley and Eamon, for that lovely introduction, and thank you, Katrina, for being our editor-in-chief. I want to introduce you to my very special guest this morning, David O'Donovan, a man I've known for some years, fellow Dub, Yahoo, living in the West. And I'm going to tell you about David in just a second, but if David, if you just cheers us with your mug, please.
Good morning. How's it going? Mug straight from New York.
I love it. I love it. I love it. Let me just tell you about David before I bring the man in himself in his own words. So, name David O'Donovan, obviously. Business name I.NY, celebrating the relationship between Ireland and New York, one story at a time. I asked, what does your business do? He says, I.NY is a cultural and diaspora project and a cultural and tourism product. He goes on to explain that the Ireland-New York story is arguably the most rich and positive international relationship we hold as a country. We get David to elaborate on that in our chat. How long established? Since 2017, following an 18-month research consultancy period in 2015-16. He says it's a seasonal project, so it's got 2 project creative directors, of which he is one, 2 part-time contract staff, but up to 20 contractors across marketing, production, event management, etc. at various times across the year, and as we get closer to the festival in particular. And he's a Dub, as I mentioned, at age 17 for college, got involved in events and broadcasting in UL, went on to work in events, festivals, venues, and magazine publishing in the city for 12 years. And then he wanted to change from running numerous weekly events, often with late nights, and work more toward 1 or 2 large annual events. Went back to UL to do a Master's in Festive Arts in order to learn more about and work more in that area, and was able to grow the I.NY idea from that work. David O'Donovan, great pleasure. Great pleasure.
Thanks, Colm.
Having you on the show.
Thank you very much. I'm really delighted to be here. I know it took us a while to put together. It's been a bit flaky in the lockdown maybe, but yeah, very, very glad to be with you this morning with everyone here. It's yeah.
That's great. It's pleasure. So David, in your own words, take us up early years, take us up to and just before I.NY, please.
Yeah, okay. I was thinking about this morning actually, in anticipation of coming on, and it was kind of a nice exercise to track back through years, and really it started from UL, from college, and came down at 17, and had always loved music, but didn't really have an outlet to get involved in it in the way I had it in college, which turned out to be college radio and the college newspaper, and just found myself doing little shows and little interviews and reviews of records and gigs and stuff in college, and I really liked that, and it immediately kind of introduced me to a group of friends on campus, which was kind of important then. I just turned 17 coming down. I didn't know anybody here, so music and writing and things and the radio quickly got me in. So that sort of set a path, which it moved on from there to running small gigs and small club nights on campus, and then began to run small things in the city, and then the things in the city got slightly bigger and bigger. The things on campus got bigger and bigger, and ended up running the events in UL for 6 or 7 years, and then starting a sort of events and publishing, small events and publishing company in the city just when we finished college. So that led us into different venues and in the city, and running festivals and larger gigs and the likes of King John's Castle and stuff like that. And really it was, I guess, 8-10 years of clubs, gigs, venues, larger scale concerts and festivals, and then publishing a magazine called The Limerick Event Guide in tandem with that. So yeah, it was a kind of a flurry of a decade from 20 to 30, and then at 30, as you mentioned, 30, 31, particularly around when the recession was beginning to bite, obviously, both professionally and personally, I could kind of feel myself shifting a bit, and that's when I wanted to get back into the college piece and work more toward that, as I say, a larger event each year, plus maybe 2 or 3 smaller things alongside that. Hope that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. I'm thinking 2 things. First, I'm thinking you decided to grow up at age 30. That's the first thing that came to mind.
Yeah.
Second thing that
yeah.
Well, welcome to the Coffee at 11 show, David. Second thing that struck me was you skipped over your early years in Dublin. I'm not going to let you away with that.
Yeah, I didn't realise that, I guess. Yeah, I did. And it's funny because I was going to a lot of shows in Dublin. My cousin was a tour manager for bands there, like the Frames. That's how I got into music with the Frames first, and he was able to occasionally sneak me in the back door of things. But that was from kind of 14, 15. I was going to those. But prior to that, it was sport really. I loved music and I loved listening to it, but I didn't know there was an outlet in it other than listening to it. So through primary and secondary school in particular, it was very much football and hurling for me, you know. And a little group of friends. I mean, it all feels very quaint now, but you know, it was what, 92, 3, 4 in Dublin, just around. I lived in Blanchardstown, so we just had our, you know, similar to now, we kind of had a 2-kilometre radius that we didn't really work outside. You know, we had school and home and our group of friends, and we had the chipper, and we'd go and play video games in each other's houses on a Saturday night, and that was kind of it. So like definitely, you know, and football then was the big thing. That was, you know, you're training 4 or 5 nights a week. We're playing two matches a weekend, football and hurling. And really it was that. It was, again, I was thinking about it this morning. We'd no internet, you know. So when I think of what we can do now, I spoke to one of my friends on WhatsApp, one from that group that I grew up with yesterday, and I'm still terrible at the technology thing. As I said to you, this is my first time doing one of these Zoom things. I don't know what I'm doing. But I have a friend in Melbourne at the moment that we went to school together, and him and I could talk for an hour yesterday. He's got a 3-year-old, and, you know, just finding out how they're getting on, and that's an extraordinary thing to be able to do, as is this. And it wasn't there, you know, it was very sort of late 80s, early 90s, smoky Dublin that I was leaving. But you're right, I didn't really begin to grow up properly till I was 30, I suppose. Until then I was running around, but it was a big step, I think, in a lot of ways to, you know, I turned 17 that August, and I was starting in Limerick a month later. So yeah, that now I immediately ran home, of course, the following weekend with, you know, with a bag of washing, having got my independence. But it was definitely a big step to come down, and it was that change. Coming to college here opened up an entire thing for me around learning that there was actually an opportunity to work within music, which I didn't know previously. So the move from Dublin to here certainly shifted things from sport being the main outside thing, or thing outside school, to music being the main thing outside school.
Yeah, pretty cool, pretty cool. I loved your analogy, by the way. Is that it's something like now we had a 2-kilometre radius in which to work and operate. And I think that's lovely, because you're absolutely right. You know, we all had it with our bikes and with our friends, and we hung around with the chipper. And, but we didn't play video games. We listened to records, but then I'm much older. So interestingly, you said you played football 2 matches of the weekend, and you mentioned football and hurling. Was football or GA for you?
Gaelic football, yeah. I never really played it. I played a little bit of soccer, but not too much. It was mainly Gaelic football and hurling. Hurling in particular, actually, I loved, yeah.
I have to comment on the fact that, as a true Dub, back in Dublin, you and I would be battered for referring to GA as football. In Dublin, football. In Dublin, football is soccer, and down here, football is GA. So it's great, really interesting. You mentioned the Frames. Did you say you on the Frames?
Yeah, and actually yeah, they were the first. I mean, I've been kind of getting into music since very early, you know, 8, 9, 10. I got a Walkman. You know, you were listening to records, I was listening to tapes of those furry orange headphones. Like, that's what I had, and I kind of lived in that for, you know, when I was 10, 11, 12, 13. I really got lost into, you know, in my Walkman. I had it on me all the time. But the Frames, and Glenn Hansard, as everyone would know him now, as I say, my cousin was tour managing him, and he was kind of 5 years, 6 years older than me. So you have that sort of big brother sense of the thing anyway. But I remember getting their first records. For some reason, I was in town at 13 or 14 and had a tenner in my pocket, which, you know, doesn't even happen a lot now. So I don't know how I had it then, but I had seen them on an MTV show play a song called Your Face, and I was a bit fixated by it. So I went in and bought the record, well, on tape. It was a little, apple on the front with nails hammered through it. The writing and the font of all of it. I was just intrigued by the whole thing. Got the tape, brought it home. And funnily enough, it was, again, football. I must have been under 15, I remember. I had pulled a hamstring. I wasn't training, but I was down there with the lads. And when they went to do their laps to warm up, I put on my headphones and pressed play on this thing. And I honestly still remember, Colm, the hiss at the start of a tape when you play a cassette. There'd be like that click and then a hiss for 2 or 3 seconds, and then the record, it starts. And I remember hearing that hiss and thinking, I wonder what this is going to be like. And the first record, or the first song on the record, is called The Dancer. And it starts with this huge drum. And straight away I was just kind of shocked into it. So it's a really vivid thing that standing in the middle of the field, not able to train, that hiss, those drums, and the lads running around, and they did 3 or 4 laps. So I got the first song and a half, went straight home after training up to my room, put it in the little tape deck thing, and just listened to it straight through. So I would have been about 14, I think, nearly 15, and it was definitely a really changing thing. And they're still in my life to this day. Glenn turned 50 on last week and had a thing on Instagram, and it was just a collection of us who've met over the years through the frames, 20, 25, 30 of us all gathering on Instagram kind of 30 years later. So it's been a huge influence, and it led into a love for Donald and Ian, and then a love for Carl Corcoran, and then a love for John Kelly and Giles Peterson, and all these people who we connected with through that first contact with the frames, and just then found out about music webbing all over the world. And it's just been a really rich thing in my life since then. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, that description of the hiss and the click, the hiss and the drums, did you all get that? That's just, this guy is dead cool. And David, you've always been so perceptive. By the way, whenever David and I have had coffee in Real, and we've had loads of coffees in Real, he works with pencil the whole time, right? And he's got the neatest writing. The last time we met was in the Savoy Hotel, and he was complimenting him on his writing. He said, "No, sure, you're the same." I showed him mine. He goes, "Ugh."
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, we were talking about that lovely tactile thing, of just the sound of the pencil and the scratch of the pencil and the heel of your hand on the page and all that. I love all that. I think it connects you to what you're doing. I think I definitely far prefer it to typing in terms of getting an idea down or getting a thought down. And yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the David O'Donovan Show. There's something in this, David. Now, seriously, your ability to pick up on the tiniest detail and turn it into something is just magical. So keep that going, my friend. Keep that going. Listen, fascinating, right? Fascinating, and we could continue for days. So we're under time constraints. Shelley, door down soon. Talk us about I.NY. Let's go to I.NY. What I'd like to do, if you don't mind, is bring us through the birth of the idea, the early struggles, because I was beside you, just helping, but beside you through those early struggles. Touch on those, and then bring us through the great success that I think last year was, and then of course COVID hit. Bring us up to COVID, will you?
Yeah, I suppose that the basis of it was, again, as I mentioned earlier, beginning to shift out of that space of running kind of 100 or 120 odd shows a year, and wanting to get into something more daytime, more office-based, and working toward a goal, a major goal at the end of once a year. And festivals were definitely on our mind a lot. And part of it was, I think, looking at the potential for the city to host large events and to have a kind of place-defining event, because there's a couple of key ones like Riverfest, obviously, and Eva and things like that. But we definitely felt there was a potential to do, a Kilkenny Cat Laughs, a Cork Jazz, a Galway Arts Festival, a Dublin Theatre Festival. Those kind of defining things for a place. We felt maybe there was room to add one more of those, but the Ireland New York idea was the first one we felt was sort of a strong enough and unique enough concept to be able to build towards something like that. We didn't think it would work to start a jazz festival, or we didn't have that expertise anyway, or, you know, whereas, okay, so I suppose that's the kind of context for it, that we felt there was huge potential in the city, in terms of venues, in terms of audience, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of accessibility regionally, nationally, and internationally, to have a larger scale cultural events if possible. That all the groundwork was there, all the resources were there, and all the parts were there. It just needed an idea, or two ideas, or three ideas, you know, like the Great Limerick Run did, like Pigtown did, all these individual ideas that are utilizing the city and benefiting the city in that way. So we were kind of aware of that, and maybe primed a bit to receive an idea like that. And I still can't, I know you and I have talked about this, Colm, I still can't to this day remember who said it to me, but I would have always had a love for New York, and I went there probably once a year throughout my 20s. I would have got a lot of energy from it. You know, I'd go for a week or 8-9 days, and that would kind of fuel me for the year in terms of publishing the magazine and running the clubs and whatever. So I always loved it, and I was coming at it again from a music space, particularly clubs and hip hop and house music and DJing, things like that. So I loved it there, and I loved the energy of it, and I felt at home there. And somebody said to me one day that the street grid system in New York was influenced by the street grid system in Limerick. And I kind of cursed at them and told them, go away or that, you know. But then did a little bit of research on it and found out it was actually, that's plausible, and that in the late 1800s, Edmund Sexton Perry was, you know, an architect and a town city planner in the city, and would have been quite renowned, and Limerick would have been quite renowned around Europe for the level of city planning it had. So the theory was that when the fire happened in New York and they were looking to redesign and rebuild, that Limerick was certainly one of the places they looked at as they did that. So that sparked an idea of maybe there's the relationship between Limerick and New York could be the bones of a festival. Honestly, that quite quickly, within a couple of days, changed to Ireland and New York, because, you know, just it felt like too large of an imbalance to put a place the size of Limerick against a place the size of New York, but it felt feasible to do it with Ireland and New York. And that just started then. Well, it didn't start it actually. It kind of put the idea on the shelf for 2 or 3 years. It felt too big, and there was other things going on. And then in 2015, myself and my friend and colleague and co-director Aoife Flynn, her and I had done quite a bit of work together on individual shows, acts she managed. We did them in Limerick, and her and I started talking about it, and that was what it needed to get going as an idea. It needed a second pair of hands and eyes, a second brain, and her skills in terms of curation and digital and her knowledge is just extraordinary. So it wouldn't have happened without that partnership coming together in the way it did. So that started us into the period of research and consultation, and that was an extraordinary period, because we began to understand, certainly at home, how many people have a connection with New York, a very personal connection. And it might be, you know, people who left 100 years ago or 80 years ago and came back, or it might be a son or daughter or a grandfather who left, or, you know, a son or daughter or grandson or daughter who left 5 years ago, or it might be that they had been there and came back, or it might simply be a connection with music, or a connection with the film of the place, or, you know, a connection through business or through education. But the diaspora piece was at the core of it, and the cultural piece was at the core of it. So as we did more and more research, the stories we were finding out were fascinating and endless. And we could see that there wasn't a space in Ireland where they were being told on a regular basis. And the reaction we were getting in personal consultations was really strong. And then we went to New York about a year into that process, and Aoife and I were sitting on the fly, and it was only when we were sitting on the flight we kind of looked at each other and went, oh, what if, you know, it's been great at home, but what if they don't care about this in New York, you know? And we hadn't thought of that until then. But actually when we got to New York, it was more visceral and more enthusiastic. So that certainly pressed us on, and we got to the point where, you know, after a year and a half, we'd kind of designed the project, and you mentioned earlier on, we see it as both a project and a product. It has to have that curatorial, creative design aspect to it to work and to connect with artists and audience, but it also obviously has to be run as a business to make it sustainable and viable, and growable. So, you know, we had finished in kind of 2016 in that space where we had a proposed project that could be developed over 3 years and a proposed business model underneath it that would support the development of it over 3 years. And then we began to do that work. And that's when it started to get particularly tricky, was securing the funding. And it had to come through the public sector first. And the model is designed that the public sector funding is phased out over a period of 3 to 5 years. But that was definitely really challenging, but also a very positive experience in lots of ways. We learned a lot there. So Fáilte Ireland were a key sponsor. The council here were also a key sponsor, and they've allowed us to build it to this point, which is COVID-19.
I love it in every sense. I love every aspect of this. Such a journey. Great idea, by the way. And I love the way ideas just pop, and they, you know, if they're properly watered and loved, they can germinate into something powerful. That's what's happening. Delighted, by the way, and that's a very real experience you described for us there, that everything's going great, you've got this great idea, loads of energy, jump on the flight and then say, what if they don't like it?
Yeah.
And truly delighted that they loved it even more over there. Yeah, I remember that first festival, and it was really 11th hour. I mean, it was 11:50 before the final funds came through to allow it happen, even though everything had been booked. So hats off to you for sticking with it and making it happen. I was fortunate enough to attend the Gala Ball last year.
Yes.
And I was blown away. The commissioner, no less than the commissioner of the NYPD, was the key speaker. I mean, how cool is that? Like, tell us about that.
It's been really enlightening and sometimes a little overwhelming, actually, to get the response of people, because I suppose we had that very Irish thing, you know, where you're ringing up, oh, will you come over, you know, and kind of like we had that sense of, will you do us a favour and come over and speak to whoever it was, not just the commissioner. And then as we worked through that, we realised, actually, this is a really nice offer, you know, come and spend some time with us in Ireland, and we'll bring you in and put you up, and we'd like you to speak at these events and meet these people. So there was a little bit of getting over that sort of, not, I wouldn't call it, it wasn't as it wasn't as what's the word I'm looking for, as noble a thing as humility. It was kind of, oh Jesus, should we be asking at all? You know, it's that very kind of cap in hand thing. So we need to get over that. But the response to, no matter who we've asked, you know, there has been some really interesting people in, like Rhonda Sherman, who was the director of the New Yorker Festival for 25 years up until this year she finished, Orla Kiley, the designer, Glenn again, you know, Joe Connor, Jane Sanders, of course, Bernie Sanders' wife, and like they're all connected to Ireland and New York. And what we found was it's the visceral piece of that connection for them is connecting them with the idea. So, and it was the same with the commissioner. So they want to be involved, which is brilliant. And it makes it a lot easier for us to ask them. And for the idea to cut through a little bit, you know, what we found is that, particularly in New York, when we're saying we're contacting you from Ireland, particularly with the commissioner and with Jane, an answer came back, or a communication came back within 3-4 days on both counts. And it was the power of the Irish connection. It was nothing to do with us. You know, it was just, we're contacting you from Ireland with this idea, and it was the Irish thing that had them say, let's talk about this. So again, that's been really powerful. And the bit that's been a bit overwhelming actually is, if I can tell you a quick thing, we did a couple of launches in New York. We're very lucky to be able to do that, working with the consulate over there, who are just brilliant. And we did one last September, 12 months, and last June. And we had been over and back to New York a couple of times in the sort of 18 months prior to the launch in September. And all of it was us, as I said, researching, consulting. There was a shift when we got that first launch, because there was about 120, 140 people at it who'd been invited by ourselves or the consulate or Fáilte or Tourism Ireland. Lisa Hannigan was playing it. It was a nice little atmosphere to it. But the difference was that it was the first time that people knew what it was and came interested, and they were asking us questions, which meant that as we met them then over the course of the week and a little later on, as we went back, it meant that we didn't have to explain as much, which gave us the opportunity to go, what's your story? Like, who are you in this Irish-New York relationship? And that happened with Carol Doherty, who left Donegal 30 years ago and has been in New York since then. Rachel from the Irish Arts Centre, who I think started in Pennsylvania, is second-gen Irish, and Anne O'Neill from Carlow, who moved from Carlow at 35 and is the horticulture manager at the Hunger Memorial down in Lower Manhattan, which is an extraordinary thing, this huge real estate footprint with an Irish cottage built on it. So we got to meet these people through the course of the research, and then through their participation in the project or attending the law. And then we got to say, who are you and what's your story? And Colm, the flood of stories that come out of that and the heart and weight behind them was genuinely overwhelming. There was particularly a week in November of 18. And I was there by myself. Aoife wasn't on this one with me. And I rang her about 3 or 4 days in, and I was just going, this is too big for us, you know, because the sense was that there's an enormity of story there and a huge wish within the community there to tell it to us at home, and there hasn't been a regular outlet, and we're not it, but we're a bit of it.
It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. Just telling us what's going on. It's such a rich story, and it's such a wonderful idea, and it's and everybody gets it. Everybody gets it. And I love that fact that, Lisa played, right? And Glenn played, by the way, that night, I wonder.
Not that, he was the first one, yeah.
Of course he was. Lisa played, Glenn played, and all of a sudden it became a thing. And then you were able to start asking people, rather than telling them what it was all about, you were able to ask them, and what's your story?
Yeah.
You mentioned, I think, a lady called Anne from Carlow. Tomorrow we'll get another dub. Girl I grew up with many years ago. Sorry about that, Grania Adams. She's on in the cafe today, but she's coming in as our guest tomorrow. She's also living in Carlow, so there's just a connection. But listen, it doesn't matter what I asked you, because it's just beautiful and rich.
Oh, I've just remembered what you asked me, which was the commissioner in particular and how he came over, and it's actually really indicative of how it's come to work, I think, because, and you will have noticed it, I think, that night, because he's second generation Irish. All 4 grandparents were Irish. They grew up in an Irish neighbourhood in Brooklyn, 2 streets which were fully Irish. He'd never been to Ireland. He'd never been until 4 months before he came with us in October. He came over for something with Drew Harris, with the commissioner there, and then we're here, and then came back for I.NY in October. But, and this is the bit actually I might pass back to you, because to hear him speak that night, he identified as Irish. He considered himself Irish. He'd never been here until 4 months previously, but that's the extraordinary thing. And even the fact that how he described himself and his Irishness felt completely different to how we would describe ourselves and our Irishness. And I think in a sense it took courage for him to do that, to come in to a room full of Irish people and say, I'm Irish because of this, this and this. I thought that took a lot of courage, and I thought he did it really well. But you could see in him the importance of the connection. And again, that idea that I've never been to Ireland, but I am Irish because all my parents were first, and that's the atmosphere and the family and the tradition I grew up in. So that's maybe it means that as an individual, and we didn't know this till we asked the question, as an individual, he was wide open to the invitation. And we've been hugely lucky in that sense that people are connecting with the idea and are open to the idea and are happy to be engaged and come. But it's because of the strength of their connection with this place that they are.
Yeah, I get that completely, David. And you're right. He came not because of the I.NY festival. He came because he identifies as Irish, and he came because he was asked, as you said earlier, by Ireland Inc.
Yes.
Asked him through the I.NY festival to come over. And I was there that night, and I was blown away because he's a big guy, and he leads with the best, right?
Yeah.
It reminded me of Blue Bloods, the
Tom Selleck thing.
Tom Selleck thing. That's what I was imagining. The Sunday carvery or the Sunday roast lunch dinner in the commission's house. Like, it was just dead cool at some levels. Anyway, come here. We better move on. Right, COVID, it's obviously not happening this year. So what?
Oh no, we're progressing as that it is, and obviously it was very interesting to see, and we were waiting for those guidelines on Friday, you know, the reopening piece. I'm very glad to get them, and we're moving ahead that there will be the possibility of live shows in September and October, albeit a 60 capacity in a 180 room, or a 200 capacity in a 600 capacity room with social distancing. But that's fine. We're going to be working very hard to try and design, and we're excited about this actually, come to try and design a live event that can cater for the environment we're in now. It's been extraordinary to see how quickly in every industry, you know, looking at restaurants becoming, you know, takeaway businesses within 10 days, looking at events and festivals going online, some of them with huge quality, looking at artists going online, some of them in huge quality. No matter what happens, this is going to change our industry for the better in a lot of ways in the long term. I never would have invited somebody to join a panel digitally before now, for a number of reasons. You have to have those bodies in the room. I think you lose the warmth and the energy by introducing a screen to a conversation with 2 or 3 live people. I wouldn't have considered it. Now I have to consider it. And then immediately I see the opportunity in it. There's 2 or 3 people who we've been trying to get over and we haven't been able to get them because of their schedule, but they want to come. Now we can do them digitally. Because I've opened myself up to it. Aoife was miles ahead of me in this, as she usually is, but I've opened myself up to it now that we can do that. But equally, the audience are opened up to it, you know, and people are experiencing things online like what we're doing now. So even in 2 years or 5 years or whenever we're back to full capacity rooms, there's now, I can't imagine that any gig will run as a standalone gig anymore. I would imagine most events will have an online aspect. They'll run live or they'll record and run as well. And it opens up a whole new audience and a whole new revenue stream in one sense, where the traditional revenue stream is maybe fizzling out and has been fizzling out for a long time. So, sorry, again, I'm wandering, but we think that we're small enough and young enough and in terms of the project to be able to move in a few directions and experiment a little bit with this. And we think in October, it might be just when we're all sort of gently coming back into that world. So it might be I think these are going to start in small and medium-sized venues anyway, which is where we've been operating. So no, we think we're going to be running shows in October. And if that changes, then it changes. And appreciating the fact that, you know, the idea and the talk of a second wave. And if we have booked shows and announced them and we're ready to go on the 16th of October and on the 15th of October, everything locks down again, then it locks down. And we'll run just online. But we're working toward running shows this year and excited to do that in this environment.
I'm delighted, and I'm going to ask the audience to give you every best wish for giving you the coffee at 11.
I've never seen that before. Okay, yeah. Okay.
This is our coffee at 11.
Is that COVID applause? Okay.
Yeah. So listen, come here, rich conversation. Thank you for that. And I love that, where I can bring a guest on and then let them off to meander. And I mean that in the nicest possible way. No, seriously, in a very positive way. Something came to mind earlier, David, which I think is worth saying. I read a book years ago. I think it was called Outliers, Malcolm Gladwell book.
Yes. Yeah.
In it, he was talking about, you know, these things that happen off out here, and people tend to ignore them. You know, that was just a fluke. But invariably, if you study them, they weren't the flukes. They were, if you like, destined to happen. I.NY feel is one of those things, if I may. And I'll tell you why. In the book, he talks about the Beatles spending 7 hours a night gigging 7 nights a week in Germany before they were the Beatles. They were the Beatles, but before they were known as the Beatles. And they crafted their their gig and they crafted their set and they crafted their stage presence 7 hours a night, 7 nights a week for whatever period of time. That made them brilliant, right? You, my friend, you crafted your ability to pull this type of mammoth, wonderful idea together by all those years and years and years of the weekly stuff. So I want to say off to you and congratulations and every best wish, David, for the future.
Thanks, Colm.
Right. We could stay on all day, but we can't. I'm quite sure there are people in the audience who want to ask you some questions. And if somebody wants to ask a question, you might wave at the screen. I'll bring you in a second. Before I do that, David, what one thing would you say to your nearest and dearest? You get through COVID best by doing blah. What's that blah for you?
Tough at times, but to give yourself the permission to not have to do everything, you know. I haven't obviously haven't fully figured it out. Who has fully figured it out? But the shift in time, the shift in, you know, you and I talked briefly about this. I think the way time is moving quickly and slowly at the same time is really bizarre. The loss of routine, the loss of, you know, there's a huge amount of. I'm a big believer as well in the kind of the energy of things and you know, there's a huge amount of obviously grief and fear and anxiety and loss in the air at the moment. And even for those of us who are really privileged enough to be able to stay home and be relatively okay, there's food in the fridge, there's a little bit of money there, there's time, there's, you know, to be able to make the most or take advantage of this time. I've been really grateful for that, but also kind of trying to balance that with a degree of guilt about how many people are suffering to the degree they are, and then trying to not let that guilt ruin the gratefulness for it. Do you know what I mean? That cycle. So I've been trying to work through that cycle and that contradiction to be kind to yourself and forgiving of yourself.
We'll go with that. We'll take that. Beautiful. Thank you for that, David. David, I'm going to go over to Tim Kelly. I'd like to come in and ask a question. Tim Kelly, you're alive.
Hey everyone. David, thank you for your comments this morning. It's been very, very interesting hearing your story. About 10 years ago, 9 or 10 years ago, I was at an event for the Limerick Local Heroes Group, and some young lady stood up and said, what about a 4th of July festival in Limerick? And I said, that sounds like a great idea. And we were kind of a group of complete amateurs having no idea what we were doing, but we said we'll try and celebrate the Irish connection in Limerick. And we got a massive amount of support from the businesses and the venues and even the council in Limerick. And I was just curious about your own experience of trying to get an event done in Limerick. We were trying to challenge the idea that events can't happen in Limerick and you can't do this and you can't do that. And we were very successful at it in a sense, even though we hadn't a clue what we were doing. But how's your experience been of putting on events in Limerick and Limerick as a host venue for something like this?
Morning. I would say 90% of the reaction to new ideas and progressive ideas and ambitious ideas in Limerick, my experience over, you know, sort of 15, 18 years of working in the city has been, yeah, let's go, let's try that, let's give it a go, and has been positive and supportive. The support we've had for the I.NY idea, and partly, okay, it's built on, you know, relationships established with hotels and venues and media and you know, production people and different providers and stuff. Partly it's based on that, but the support has been extraordinary amongst retailers, amongst venues. It was tricky in the council. I don't think it's unfair to say that. But I understand that too, in the sense of I would think the council get 50 phone calls a day going, I have a great idea, how do I get money? And to try and filter through that has to be extraordinarily difficult. And we worked with a number of individuals in there who were just excellent in trying to get it through, but we were working through systems and bureaucratic requirements and political requirements that we had to learn very fast, and we had to understand why some things happen and why some things don't. And so all of that was a real education for us. We found the exact same thing at the national level, and I think the reason we may have been able to progress it was because the Fáilte Ireland as a national tourism agency liked the idea, took on support of the idea in a very incremental piece, you know, back to the feasibility study, then back to the next step, then incrementally back the next step. And I think, so they were trying us and testing us as well in a good way, as they should, being respectful of their budgets. And each step took 6 to 9 months or so. And I think the commitment of Fáilte Ireland and the support of the businesses underneath helped the council support it to the degree they did. And they took a risk as much as everyone else took a risk. And I suppose that piece, it was the piece I had to understand, that it's all well and good for Aoife and I to pitch this, but we are looking for funding support that other people have to answer for and justify, and it's a risk for them. And we had to appreciate the risk for them, and we had to appreciate what we were asking of them. And we learned all that kind of detail as we went, I think. But certainly the national support for the idea was a big catalyst, I think, in securing that ongoing local support. I hope so. Yeah.
A great question, Tim Kelly. Thank you for that, and David, really great response. And I'll touch on it because I was again sniffing around the 4th of July festival back in the day. And Tim, if I may just suggest respectfully to all of those, including myself, who are involved in the 4th of July idea, go back to what I said about the Beatles and this man here, David O'Donovan, the depth of experience that he brought to the table as a backable idea. You know, we were nice people, dare I say it, with a good idea, right? But, you know, could we have run a festival like this man? I don't know. Perhaps in time. So, Tim,
we would have given to have David's experience 10 years ago. I mean, you mentioned about 15 things in the space of 10 minutes that I just so wish I had the foresight to think of. It would have been much more success had you been on board, but I'm delighted it's come full circle and you're driving ahead with I.NY. It sounds fantastic.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tim. Thank you, Tim. And do you know what? I actually think it's the right festival for Ireland and for Limerick. Limerick, it's centred in Limerick, but it's an Ireland, New York festival. Fabulous stuff. I'm going to hand over to Princess Shelley. Tell us what's been going on in the cafe. Thanks, Tim. Princess Shelley, you're live.
Hey, David. Thank you for such a great interview. I've loads of little notes made and with some brilliant comments here in the chat. Al, the coffee guy who joined us as a guest there in one of the early shows, says he alluded to what you mentioned about energy, which I agreed with myself. The lack of energy in the atmosphere is really obvious, Al said. Hard to self-generate energy to make change, stay positive and drive business. We feed off all the outlying energy. So he obviously agreed with what you said there. I have a couple of comments that are looking for a bit of feedback from you as well. Excuse me. Vicky Kelly, who has had to pop off, she says, I love this conversation. You are an inspiration, as indeed is our Colm. Thank you both. I like the our Colm. Someone's owned you there, Colm. Then Mary popped in. Is Mary still here? And Mary said, David, loving all that you are sharing. Thank you. How important do you think it is to build a brand? Is this something that you focus on? And if yes, do you feel it's an ongoing exercise?
The answer is, the shortest one I'll give, Colm, I'll be glad to hear, absolutely yes. The importance of the brand, again, we have learned how important that is. Can I just mention someone, and actually, Colm, I must connect you with her because she'd be a fascinating person to talk to in this format. Her name is Mary Leonard. She's our graphic designer. Leonie Lynch put us in touch with her, who I know was a guest of yours a couple of weeks ago. She's an extraordinary woman in her late 20s now, a graphic designer who came out of NCAD. She's from Sligo. Went to NCAD, moved straight to London to work with a major agency over there, got picked up by Orla Kiley, which is where Leonie met her, and then worked as head of design for Google Labs. She takes on a couple of projects, 3, maybe 4 Nixer projects a year, and things that she's interested in and wants to do. And she worked with us on the brand for 6 or 8 months in terms of the concept design and the graphic design. And we love it because it's really clean, the logo, and it's really coming to do it. But yes, the brand is absolutely paramount in its simplicity and in its warmth and in its accessibility. And working with someone who's really strong at that is hugely important. And Mary Leonard is just the best in the.
Thanks for that, David. Thank you very much for that. Sure, we can look her up. Magella has said, great conversation. Wonderful to hear how he is adapting to our new circumstances. His honesty and reflective conversation is inspiring, which is a recurring theme here in the cafe on the Coffee at 11 show, that you're out there, you're inspiring everyone, not just people that are here in the cafe right now, but the people listening to the replay later on. I have another quick one there. He is our in charge of guest comfort. He's monitoring the cafe all the time. He said, David, you mentioned one or two experiences of feeling overwhelmed. Clearly, you always move through it. You're a high achiever. You get things done. My question is, can you share something you do to ground yourself, to come out of overwhelm and take action?
Maybe a tricky one to answer, but it's definitely, it's to slow down as much as possible. I live by myself and have done for a number of years. So actually there's a quietness in living by yourself that allows me to kind of charge up before I go out into the world a little bit. And I know once I leave the office and I get in the car and I hit the roundabout that heads toward Bruff, I know, okay, I can leave it behind me now. So there is an element of fighting in it. I mean that in the best way. I mean that in tackling it. I don't want to sound like I've got all the answers as well, because I absolutely don't. Like, I mean, I can't explain to you the amount of days I'm like, oh Christ, I have to go and do this again, you know, and you're bringing it on yourself. So maybe it goes back to that piece of just trying to know as best as possible how I'm feeling and what I'm feeling.
Yeah.
And being able to respond from a calm, authentic place. Does that make sense?
That sounds perfect, David. You see, I see Eamon there. He's the thumbs up. He's nodding. Other people in the cafe are nodding. And that's the beauty of this, is that nobody's a true expert and we're all just sharing our own experiences. Just before I hand back to Colm, and Sharon would like to, Sharon McDermott, who again has been a guest on the show, she asked me just to say to you, David, as a small Irish design wholesaler of children's clothing with interest in breaking into the US market, what advice would you give as the best first step?
First of all, the consulate in New York in particular were just marvelous, right? Really open, really low-key and enormously helpful. So connecting with the consulate and asking them that question would be a huge first step and would open a lot of doors. Then building that network within the city, again, the openness of the Irish community. It's funny, it's actually quite, what we found was we met kind of 12 or 15 people in different organizations, the Irish Arts Centre, the Irish Business Organization, New York Luxman House and NYU, New York Irish Centre, you know, different educational, business, cultural, social, and all of them said, all 12 said, you need to talk to these other 11. Do you know what I mean? So the network is really open, really supportive. And the one thing I would say, and an amazing woman in the consulate who we met on the first day we went in, made this observation to us, because when we met the consulate first, we had a relatively well-developed concept, and we wanted their opinion on how we could develop it within New York and improve it and get their input and the input of the Irish community there. And what she did say to us on that day was, a lot of people come in and go, I have a great idea, who has all the money in New York? And she said it's a much better way to have your product advanced to a degree and look to advance it further, to be prepared, I guess, and know what you're trying to do and know what your product is, and then communicate rather than just jumping in and going, I've got a great idea, where's the money?
I am going to call it because we're running out of time. Sharon McDermott, thank you for that lovely question, and David, as ever, a phenomenal answer. But I'm conscious of respecting the time of everybody in the cafe. And we sort of made a promise to keep it within the hour, and rich stuff, that's the problem, right? Far too rich for us to just get an hour. But I do think, going back to your festival last year, David, that lady, I can't remember her name, and she has hashtag wearing Irish.
Margaret Malloy.
Margaret Malloy. Sharon, check out Margaret Malloy, hashtag wearing Irish.
Yes.
Fabulous connection for you.
Yes.
Come here. I know Mary Ruddy threw in some comments there. Mary, apologies we didn't get to it today, but I do think it's time for us to bring the cafe to a beautiful close for the day. Before I do, let's just give David O'Donovan a big round of applause to say it's been a pleasure, a real pleasure.
Thank you.
And then before I let you all go, I'd like to tell you who's coming in tomorrow. So Grania Adams, a friend of mine, see she's come on video there, she's smiling. Not going to let you in today, Grania. But Grania's coming in tomorrow on the Coffee at 11 show. And Grania and I hung out together when we were kids, right? This goes way back. I'm showing your age here. But she went on to become very successful in life, right? And she has one of the largest homeopathy businesses in the country, two very busy practices, one in Carlow, one in Dublin. And her son, wait till you hear this, her son is also an Olympian. Beat that if you can. So come here, really looking forward to having Grania Adams on the Coffee at 11 show tomorrow. Between now and then, folks, stay safe out there, stay together by staying apart. And one last time, David O'Donovan, it's my pleasure.
Thanks, Colm. Thanks very much. Thanks, folks. See you all soon.